Today on Locked On Canadiens, it's the Friday Mailbag, and we answer questions about will the Canadiens try and move up again in the draft to get another top 10 pick? We'll talk about the Laval Rocket and what their next game is going to look like. We talk so much about the prospects, the future of this team. It's really exciting, and all of that's coming up in just one moment on Locked On Canadiens.
For Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 615 of Locked On Canadiens. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. We're your first listen of the day, 5 days a week, all about the Montreal Canadiens. My name is Laura Saba, also known as the Active Stick, and today I'm flying solo for literally the first time in my life. This is my first solo episode. I'm usually joined by Scott Matla of Habs Eyes on the Prize, who's off this week, and for the rest of the week, I've had some amazing guests like Andrew Berkshire, Dylan Waugh, Ian Boisvert, and you can check out all those episodes wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Canadiens. We've had some really great discussion over the past week. We talked about, obviously, we had an immediate reaction to the Canadiens winning the draft lottery. We talked about whether we have been wrong about David Savard, Jonathan Drouin, and Josh Anderson all this time. And we had a special Shane Wright themed related episode, just our previous episode 614 that dropped on Thursday with Andrew Berkshire, where we didn't just talk about how this changes the Canadiens for the future. We also talked about where the Canadiens could play him in the lineup. And we also talked about the importance of having a natural center, or why that is such a big idea when it comes to NHL drafting or free agency. And all of that can be found on our last episode. It was really great discussion, and I hope you check that out. And I also want to thank that Murderers Row of special guests that I had. It was a really, really fun week. And this episode in particular, I hope you bear with me. I've never done this before, and I'm quite nervous. So I'm going to get right into the Laval Rocket. So I'm recording this after they have beaten the Syracuse Crunch 4-1 in their first home game, in the first home playoff game at Place Bell. The atmosphere was amazing. There were videos of the tailgate. There's a whiteout. The pregame presentation was kind of like an Olympic opening ceremony. It was a huge deal. And the fans were not quite at all. I was watching it on RDS and I could hear everything, like every little thing. And it was a really, really good game. They opened the scoring early on the power play, and the Crunch were basically parading to the penalty box for the rest of that period, but the Rocket weren't really able to capitalize on that. It was getting a little bit stagnant. The Crunch tied it in the second period, I believe it was, and then there was almost no action. It was just, there were power plays that they weren't like capitalizing on. There were a couple of near misses with Caden Primo being in the right place at the right time. And then the third period is where the offense exploded. Cedric Paquette was the eventual game-winning goal scorer, but Jean-Sébastien Day and Louis Belpedio also scored. It was really good. I think a good feeling, because it's a best of 5 series, and now they're up 3-1 on the Crunch, and they can close it out at home. They're up 2-1. It's a best of 5. They're up 2-1. They need to win a third, and they can close it out at home on Saturday. I really hope to make that game. It really did seem like an exciting and fun time. I'm quite jealous of all of you who got to go. I know a lot of our listeners were sending me tweets from the game. It seemed like just a fantastic, fantastic game. And honestly, this is so much fun. And I do hope they manage to close out the series and make another round, because I think it's really fun to have playoffs in Laval for the first time in their history. You know, when they first moved here, there were a lot of really rough seasons. And I think it's kind of emblematic over the course of the last 2 to 3 years, where they have really made a turnaround in developing that team and using it like a development team, like using it as a farm. As our guest from last week, Mike O'Brien, said, you should check out last Friday's Mailbag. It was really interesting and insightful as well, where there was a lot of talk about the power play. But one of the things that we did talk about was using the Laval Rocket as a farm team, as a development team for the Montreal Canadiens. And as we know, they are in a rebuild. They now have the first overall draft pick. And so the future is bright, but it's all about what they do with that. So I think I'll get into the mailbag questions because there's one specific question that we received by email. And I hope you'll bear with me as my notes are all on my phone. And it had to do with the Canadiens winning the draft lottery. And I think it's a good way to kind of kick off the mailbag, this week's mailbag, talking about the future. And so this comes from Dylan S. Thank you so much, Dylan. Hey, Laura and Scott. Now that the Habs have won the draft lottery and will most likely draft Shane Wright, is there any situation where you anticipate the Habs adding another top 10 pick? If so, which picks, prospects, or roster players could we see going the other way? Teams like Buffalo and Ottawa might be inclined to trade for immediate help. Now, this is one of those things where obviously the Canadiens already have the first overall pick. But trying to get somebody in that top 10, usually in any draft, like you can't really go wrong with the first, 2 to 7, 2 to 8 usually. And there are a lot of names that in this draft that are really, really exciting. And as we know, the Canadiens aren't just in need of center depth. They also need game-breaking defensemen. They need somebody who can become a number one defenseman. I think the problem that you have in this year's draft is that it might be true that the the Buffalo Sabres perhaps, or the Ottawa Senators might want more immediate help. But I think it depends on how smart their front offices are, because those teams are not a player away from contending. So the Canadiens would have to offer quite a lot in order to move up and get those picks. They have another pick. Obviously, it's Calgary's pick, but we're expecting that to be pretty late in the first round. And then they've got, obviously, the 33rd pick, which in the second round is the first. That's kind of on the cusp of being a first rounder. So you could get some really good names in there. You could trade one of those two picks plus. The problem with the Canadiens, though, is that they're trying to build talent, right? One of the knocks on this team is that they lack talent. They don't have enough of it. So they would have to be willing to part with talent with either term, youth, and there's not a whole lot on this team that could benefit those other teams. Ironically, I think the one team that would have been an option would have been Chicago, but Columbus owns their pick. So they don't have that. I think it's the 6th overall pick that I think you could have done a deal with Chicago, but I don't think it's going to work. And I'm going to ask this to Scott next week when he's back from his break, because I'm interested to see what he says, because it's obviously a no-brainer. If you can get another top 10 pick, you shop your players and your picks and maybe prospects. I just don't see the teams that are in the top 10 this year wanting to do it, because I think they're all in kind of the same boat. They're in the top 10 for a reason. It's because for the most part, they're missing a lot of talent on their team, and they need to improve via sort of rebuild, retool, or whatever you want to talk about it. But it's a really intriguing idea. And so we're going to get into some more questions, particularly about the Laval Rocket. Maybe we'll talk about who from the Rocket is most likely to make the team next season. But first, I want to tell you all about Built Bar. If you've listened to this show at all, or even if you haven't, you should know that Built Bar is a protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar. It is so delicious. It's chock full of protein. Every single bar is low in sugar, high in protein, made with real chocolate, and they're so delicious. If you're used to protein bars, you'll know they have this grainy, sandy texture most of the time, and they have that distinct whey protein taste. You know the one I'm talking about if you've tried any protein bar, and no matter what flavor it says it is, Built Bar is absolutely not like that. They're so good. They're unbelievably good. I use them every day as an on-the-go breakfast, because very often I can't get it together, and you want to make sure that you're not starting your day off, especially when you're busy and you have two jobs, you're not starting your day off without, something to give you energy and keep you going. But Scott uses them on his hikes. I use them before and after running sometimes, and I can't tell you how delicious they are. They have 18 delicious regular flavors, but every once in a while they have, pretty frequently actually, they have a special edition flavor. I saw they had a white chocolate birthday cake puffs the other day, like a puffs, like a marshmallowy kind of texture. These bars really do taste like treats. And if you want to try one, you can check out built.com, and don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKED15 so you'll get 15% off your order. That's LOCKED15 at built.com for 15% off your order. All right, now I want to get into our mailbag questions that we received over Twitter. Once again, sorry, my notes are on my phone, so if you're watching on YouTube, please bear with me regarding that. So we got tons of questions, and I really appreciate all of you who saw that I was kind of panicking about hosting the show by myself and sending copious amounts of questions. Let's start with a question from frequent listener Jeff the Red. How successful do you think the NHL was in turning the 5-minute process of announcing the draft order into a half-hour show? Here's the thing I'm going to say about that. We all watched it. It was half an hour long when it could only have been 4 minutes, but every single one of us was watching it. It is so unbelievably successful, and it's so annoying because they turn out to be right. Most of us were just like, even no matter if you say you're just going to wait until the end to see, right? Montreal's got like a really high chance of being a high number there. You still watch the whole thing, and you still commented when, the Vegas Golden Knights didn't move up at all. You still commented with, most of the changes or non-changes, as it were. You held your breath as you saw that the New Jersey Devils weren't where they were supposed to be, so you know that they moved up. You held your breath before they called Arizona as the 3rd overall pick. And finally, you cheered when you heard that Montreal had the 1st overall pick. And we all did it. So I feel like it's so good and so clever by the league. It's very annoying, but they got us. It's super successful. Another question from Jeff. Now that you're on YouTube, what's the one thing you would like to put in your background if you could get it? The real life Josh Anderson. That's what I would have in my background. Our friend Beth, hi Beth from the Happy Hour. We know Scott is a Jersey person. What is your hockey thing that you spend all your money on? Personally, that is true about my co-host, Josh Anderson on the brain. Scott has plenty of NHL jerseys. He's got actually some really cool jerseys as well. He's got a great Rocket jersey. He's got some fantastic jerseys. A great collection. I have none of those things. I have one Montreal Canadiens t-shirt. I actually have a few, but one that currently fits me. And I spend my money on going to games. That's pretty much it. Or concessions at the games, but I don't have a lot of Canadian stuff. I don't have a lot of Canadians clothing. I'm one of those people where I guess I just have too much stuff, right? Like I used to. People would buy me so much Canadian stuff all the time, pens, like teddy bears, all kinds of stuff like that. I had so many of them. I gave them away to nieces and nephews and other children in my life. I was trying to downsize. I don't know if you can tell if you're watching on YouTube. I'm trying to get organized with my life. I'm trying to have an organized sort of minimalist kind of life. I'm working on that. So I spend money on games is essentially what it is. And parking when I go to those games. No, I don't park at the Bell Center, but if you've ever driven downtown, you'll know. We've got a question from our good friend Goalie Droid. Hey, Goalie Droid, who was at the Rocket game. What do you think of the Rocket doing a whiteout for the playoffs? So this is one of those things where, as fans, you kind of are in two camps because I believe it's the original Winnipeg Jets that came up with this idea. And then if any team in any league does this, everybody's like, either you're copying the Winnipeg Jets, so like you're a purist and you don't like that, or you think it's cool. And I personally think it's cool. I don't, the thing about the whiteout, I think, is that the reason they pick white is probably for television purposes, because for me, I'm like, it's the Rocket. It's a Habs team. Like, why not go with red or blue, right? Why does it have to be a whiteout? They were handing the t-shirts out anyway. It's not like they were saying wear white. They were handing t-shirts out when you got to the game. So I feel like you could get creative with that and use other colors, but whiteouts are cool. I think they look cool. Although it was, when you were watching on television, and I did note this on Twitter, is that like the ice kind of looks weird. And it was Jared Book of Habs Eyes on the Prize that pointed out it's probably because of everybody wearing white. It's kind of like the camera lighting and stuff was messed up. Either way, I think it's cool. I'm one of those people where I think it's cool, but I also feel like you could get creative with it. Sometimes you'll see a sea of red or gold or whatever. So do that. Like whiteouts are Winnipeg's thing. But I don't think that you shouldn't be allowed to do it if you're another team, another sport, another league. I think you should just kind of do something that's one of your own. That's where I stand on that. And we got plenty more questions coming up, particularly, who from the Rocket do you think will make the Habs next year? And plenty of fun off the rails questions from some of our listeners. And all of that's coming up in just one moment. But first, I'm going to tell you about BetOnline, because our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, NHL playoffs, fights, and even next season's NFL features. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. And where the Canadiens game starts is obviously the Laval Rocket has a lot of the players that are going to be the future of this team. So our next mailbag question comes from Traig Wilson of Habs Unfiltered and the Hockey Writers. And thank you so much for your question. Which Rocket Laval player do you think has the best chance of being a regular player with the Habs next season? So I think it depends on whether the player had an extended time with the Habs this year or not. So this is based on what you meant with your question, because for me, I think Corey Schooneman is a no-brainer. I think they'll bring him back. I think they like him a lot. I think he'll come back to the Montreal Canadiens and have more time. But if he doesn't count because he did spend a significant time in Montreal this season, I'm torn between Jesse Ylönen and Raphael Harvey-Pinard, because conventional wisdom says that, Raphael Harvey-Pinard has taken the steps and done the development that around this time in his career would make sense for him to start playing more regularly with the Canadiens. So, he would be, and I think either way, his goal should be and will be to try to make the Canadiens out of camp. I think that makes a lot of sense. But for me, when you're looking at the team and you're looking at who do you want to be your first line, who do you want to be your second line, presumably, if the Canadiens draft Shane Wright, you're going to have, he's going to presumably be your second line center, if not your first, depending. I don't think it's going to be the first. I think he's going to be the second. I do think that you would want to bring in Jesse Ylönen and have him play with Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield and have that line, because they're going to be facing a little less of the tougher matchups than they have been this season, because there's a second line to worry about now, a legitimate second line to worry about for other teams. I think that Ylönen would be fun there. I really, really do. I think that line could be really fast and fun and exciting. Put them together on the power play. I don't know. That's just what I'm saying. So those two are the ones, if you're not counting Corey Schooneman. Those are the ones that I would go with. Blaine Potvin, also of Habs Unfiltered. Which Canadiens roster or prospect player do you think would make the best teacher? So I feel like Nick Suzuki can do anything. I feel like based on that, I probably should disqualify him from this question and think of somebody else. And you asked me this question 14 hours ago, and I've literally been thinking about it this entire time, because you could go with, I feel like, hear me out on this one. Michael Pezzetta is the cool teacher. He's the substitute teacher. He's got the ponytail. He probably wears a beret to work. He's like the substitute teacher that kind of, he thinks he's cool, but the students don't necessarily, but they end up spending class chatting instead of studying or learning or anything like that. So that to me feels like it would make sense. In terms of the prospects, I don't really know, but I feel like, or even a regular player, you know what? Jeff Petrie has teacher vibes. I'm going to go with it. Jeff Petrie he just has teacher vibes. That's just the way he is. And I don't know if it's because he has 15 little children, but that's who the vibes are coming from. And these are some really interesting questions, actually. I didn't really know. I didn't really expect to have to think really hard on them as much as I have. Tony Ferrari, good friend of the show, Tony Ferrari. We love you. You are literally not just a Locked On Canadiens favorite, just a Locked On NHL podcast favorite. We have a group chat. Everybody always talks about how great Tony Ferrari is because he's fantastic. And he's obviously a prospect and scouting expert. And his question is, It doesn't happen often, but what would it take, in your opinion, for the Habs to trade out of the first pick? Buffalo's 9th and 16th picks? Columbus's 6th and 12th? Something else, or do you just not consider it? So I tend to think that a bird in the hand is, that whole thing. It's worth it. Like if you've already secured the first overall, and you've got a player that seems to be the only one that people agree might be ready to make the jump to the NHL. Like he could stay where he is in the OHL or make the jump to the NHL, but everyone else needs a little bit more patience and time. And he's also somebody that you need. You need that two-way center. You need that guy who's good enough to really, really shore up your center depth, especially because the Canadiens have issues like defensively. Having a two-way guy like that is so, so important. So personally, I wouldn't consider it. But I think it depends as well as who might be available for the 6th and 12th, like who you have in your depth chart, who you've projected might help, because the Canadiens need two major things that they need to build around. As one, we talked about that center. They also need a really strong defenseman, like somebody who's going to be, no questions asked, their number one. So Tony, my question to you is, 9th and 16th or 6th and 12th? You tell me, are there these two players that will be the future, like either second line or first line center of this team, or the number one defenseman of this team? If there are guys that'll be available at that point, I do the trade, because you're getting two things instead of the one thing that you need. And you already have Nick Suzuki. You know he's talented. You know he's capable of being a first line center. So you just get, it's not as far-fetched as you think, but I generally tend to err on the side of, you've already got the first overall. Don't mess with that. Don't trade away. But when you come back, Tony, I'm going to ask your question back to you. I'm going to be very, very excited to hear what you say. So we've got tons more questions. Jeff the Red asks, what are the best and worst things about hosting the podcast solo? And this is also a question that Chris H asked as well on Twitter. What's the best part about solo hosting and what's the worst? I would say the best part about solo hosting, other than nothing, is that this is an opportunity for personal growth, because I don't know if you can tell if you're watching on YouTube, but I am so nervous doing this. I'm probably also speaking really fast if you're listening to the podcast. This is something that is totally out of my comfort zone, and I'm really, really uncomfortable right now. I also know that because I'm a woman speaking alone and I don't have my co-host to kind of insulate and absorb, that I'm going to get the worst comments I've ever received. The reviews are going to be really bad. Like people are going to literally log on and subscribe to us on Apple or Spotify to give me bad reviews, because that's just how it is when you are a woman talking about sports. And I know that the YouTube comments are going to be pretty mean. They're probably even going to be hidden. Like that's how bad they're going to be, is that they won't even show up. They'll be held for review. So those are things I'm not looking forward to. And this is really something that's totally out of my comfort zone. Like I do talk a lot, and I feel a lot more confident when somebody's here. And I think the best part is literally just me being out of the comfort zone. And the worst part would be, my anticipation of how people are going to react to it. But also I just miss my co-host. He is somebody that I've said this so many times that I would not do this podcast with anyone other than Scott Matla. He is literally one of the greatest work partners I have ever worked with. But I have to thank as well Andrew Berkshire, Ian Boisvert of the Build podcast, and Dylan Wall of Hockey Unfiltered and Habstitution, because they also, I feel like we had a similar positive chemistry when they were guest hosting with me over the course of this week. And it's partly because they're just good people, right? And so I guess the worst part is literally just that I miss my co-host, and that's it's a little lame, but I think it's definitely something that that I'm very, very glad that he's coming back for the Monday episode, is all I'll say. Jeff the Red also asks, how are you even conscious after hosting all those podcasts on Tuesday and Wednesday? So on Tuesday during the day, I hosted one we recorded with Andrew Berkshire. That was the review that we did of David Savard, Jonathan Drouin, and Josh Anderson. And then when the lottery draft pick was announced, or the Canadiens winning the lottery was announced, Scott and I went live and did a live reaction, and I was the host on that one. And then I did a roundtable with the Locked On Coyotes host Robin Liano, Erica Lindsay Ayala of Locked On Kraken and Russ Cohen of Locked On Flyers, and I hosted that as well. And then on Wednesday, I hosted another episode with Andrew Berkshire where we talked about Shane Wright, how he would fit in to the Canadiens' plans. And again, that natural center, like what does that mean? Why is it so important? Why do so many teams want it? Why is it, one of the most coveted positions in the drafts? And that was also, I recorded that on Wednesday. And you can find all those podcasts, like they're on our YouTube feed. They're wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Locked On Canadiens. They're the most recent episodes. And again, thanks to all those guys. It was exhausting. I didn't think so. I think people don't realize that hosting a podcast is not as easy as it looks or sounds. People always think I could have a podcast. I could do that. It's true. Technically you can, but we have a podcast that's been around for 3 years, little less than 3 years. And we've got thousands of subscribers and listeners, and we've got tons of people just supporting us. And it took a long time to get to a point where we feel that we can put out a podcast and feel good about it and feel positive about it. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of time. So I think that even though we talk about how seamlessly it fits into our lives now, myself and Scott, it's still hard and it's still exhausting. Like I am pretty tired. I actually have plans today when you're listening to this on Friday, and I don't know what they are. I know I made plans with people. I literally don't know what they are. So if you're my friends who I made plans with, please reach out to me and let me know. I'm supposed to meet you today. In the meantime, we've got a couple more questions. Scott Mallow with a really cruel question. FMK, Thai food, Greek food, or Italian food? So here's what I'm going to say, and you have to hear me out to the end. F, Thai food, spicy. M, Italian food, comforting. K, Greek food, but only because I can make pretty good Greek food at home. So that's the only thing. So don't come at me. I love Greek food a lot. It's the only one that I could eliminate from this. And then finally, we've got a couple more questions from our frenemies. JD Young at Locked On Sharks. On a scale of 1 to 10, how likely was the draft rigged so the Canadiens would win the draft while also hosting the draft? And who is the most likely to be traded at the draft? All right, so how likely is it? It's not likely at all. It depends on who you believe, because the Canadiens believe, or the Canadiens fans believe, that the NHL hates them and conspires against them. And everyone else believes that the NHL loves the Canadiens and conspires for them. I think we just got lucky, and no regrets, really. And who's most likely to be traded at the draft? If you're talking about Montreal Canadiens, I think Mike Hoffman. I think he's probably the one that Canadiens wouldn't hesitate to trade. With Jeff Petrie, they might hesitate until they find better return, or they might have a conversation with him and he wants to return, in which case they don't need to find a veteran defenseman. They can still keep him until later on. Maybe they'll trade him next year. Jonathan Drouin, I think, like Andrew Berkshire pointed out, I think he starts the season with the Montreal Canadiens. They put him in position to score a lot of goals just so that they could trade him a little bit later in the season, especially since his contract is coming up. So all of the players that the Canadiens would trade or could trade, I think Mike Hoffman is the one where they wouldn't think twice. They wouldn't hesitate. So if you're talking about any other team, I probably have no idea. JD, thank you for your question. And finally, the nemesis of the show, Will Christ, he's a nemesis, but I have to thank him for asking 3 questions. The first question is, when someone eventually makes a documentary revealing the heinous collusion that occurred to give the Canadiens the number 1 pick, who would you want to play you in the dramatic recreation of the events following the lottery reveal? Jessica Alba. I don't know. That was the first name that came into mind when you asked this question. So Jessica Alba it is. Next question, again from Will. If you found yourself in the common movie trope of having to organize an event of some sort to save a beloved local thing, what would the event be? Afternoon tea, 100%. I've always wanted to host an afternoon tea. I'm pretty good party host, dinner parties, Oscar parties, all that. Kind of famous for them. I've done charity events as well. Never done an afternoon tea type party. That is what I would do, and it would be Alice in Wonderland themed. And finally, this is, I think, one of my favorite questions. What is your favorite kind of potato and preferred method of preparation for said potato? So my favorite potato is actually red potatoes. And these, like, it's interesting because that's not the potato you're normally supposed to use for my favorite preparation of the potato. So generally you're supposed to use white potatoes for what I'm about to say. And that is, there's a Middle Eastern dish, particularly like I make it the Lebanese way. It's called batata harra, means like spicy potatoes. I'm sure you've heard patatas bravas, like, it's in Spanish cuisine, that's what they have. There's variations of it, but our version of it is called batata harra. And you cube the potatoes, you pan saute them, I think is like shallow fry them. You can also like boil them and put them in the oven, roast them and all of that, but I just do it all in a pan with olive oil, black pepper, red chili flakes. You want it to be a bit spicy. Garlic, the garlic is the most important component, and cilantro. And if you don't like cilantro, tough, because I'm putting cilantro in it because it completes the picture. Like batata hara is not a thing if you don't put enough cilantro in it. So that's my favorite preparation. You're not supposed to use red potatoes for that. You're supposed to use the white potatoes because the red potatoes don't have the right texture when you're doing the pan frying or whatever you want to call it. But I cheat anyway, and because red potatoes are my favorite in terms of flavor. So that's all for our questions. If you would like to send us mailbag questions, you can send them at lockedoncanadians@gmail.com. You can also leave them in the YouTube comments, but just be warned, if you leave YouTube comments that are mean, nasty, cruel, misogynistic, anything like that, I will delete the comment and I will hide you from the channel, so you cannot comment anymore. And you can also tweet them at LO_Canadians. You can find us on Twitter at LO_Canadians, actually. You can find me at The Active Stick. You can find my co-host Scott Matla at Scott Matla. He will be back for the Monday episode, and not a moment too soon, because this has been the sweatiest I've been in my entire life. I miss Scott so much. And when you're done listening to us, please check out Locked On NHL, where they have been owning playoff coverage. It's been so great. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for bearing with me for an entire episode if you've listened or watched this far. And I will talk to you, along with Scott, next week.